Farnese de Vendimian, one of the more complex characters that Berserk has to offer us, with the notable trait of being something of a pyrophile who burns all sorts of things, primarily heretics I suppose, but rather annoyingly on at least one occasion she tried to burn the subscribe button for the New World Review, which luckily being an exclusively digital existence is immune to literal fire, and instead simply resulted in Farnese receiving hopefully regular Berserk content uploaded straight into her YouTube feed. Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga, and it is Berserk time again, because today I would like to explore a certain character, one who I feel is overshadowed by, I suppose, almost every other primary existence in this series, being Farnese de Vendimian, a character whose journey piques my interest like no other. And to begin, I should say that Farnese is a very difficult character to me in the best possible way, that is. And it's actually quite incredible to think back on her at various points in the series, because if you do cast your minds back to, say, the Conviction arc, then this character is almost entirely unrecognizable to how we encounter her in the Fantasia events. And I'm really not sure that you could say the same for any other character actually, at least not one who is incorporated into the main band of protagonists. For example, I feel like you could point to Guts at any stage in the Berserk journey and immediately recognize who this man is and what he stands for. Same thing with Casca, same thing with Shirke, Serpico, Isidro, and of course Mr. Puck. Which isn't to say that these characters don't develop at all, they most certainly do, but Farnese is a completely different existence altogether. Throughout her tenure in Berserk, everything we thought we knew about this character has been consistently challenged, and she has changed in almost every facet imaginable, be it her basic appearance or her core beliefs. And one of the more stark examples of this is that obviously Farnese was introduced as not just a member but the leader of the Holy Iron Chain Knights, an organization devoted to the strict protection of religion and religious figures, and it also consisted of high-ranking nobility, and if anything, the whole organization was more or less a ceremonial existence. And of course, in addition to that, Farnese was also wildly selfish at the helm. Cut to the modern day, and Farnese has abandoned her defense of that faith, and is now doing the exact opposite by engaging in heresy through studying magic under Shirke with an informal ragtag band of commoner nobodies, of which she is certainly not the leader. Farnese has done a complete 180, and that is a very difficult thing to pull off as a writer. To move one character so satisfactorily from one end of the spectrum to the other can often come across as a bit forced or contrived. But Farnese's journey is nothing short of a masterclass in this realm that sees a complete awakening of her mentally, emotionally, and even sexually. In fact, I suppose that last one was very much a key spark to the character, which we'll get into. But Farnese's impressive character arc is not what I find to be the most compelling aspect of her. What I really love is that within this single individual is a full spectrum of human existence. She can be taken to the true depths of darkness, depravity, and unrelenting cruelty, but at the same time, through her, Miura can also portray the most gentle, caring, and beautiful, upstanding human being possible. And for some comparisons of the aforementioned darkness, Farnese's intriguing childhood led her to, as I said in the intro, becoming something of a pyrophile, and thus receiving distinct sexual pleasure from the act of burning people, heretics specifically. But then of course, in Farnese's case, I'm not so sure that the reason why she was burning people mattered as much as the act itself. In fact, this tendency began as a child when she was heavily praised by adults simply for burning people. And you know, teeny tiny Farnese had no understanding of why this act was happening, she just engaged in it, which continued well into adulthood with the excuse in mind that this was for the good of the world. And I suppose that's what leads to her redemption in this particular area. Due to the primal allure to sadism and the mask of faith to implement it, Farnese does of course reach a point in her life where she comes to understand the intricacies of the world around her. And most notably, she provides heavy contrast to a character like Father Mozgus, who is infinitely drawn to faith and as a result will commit any degree of what I would honestly call evil for the sake of quelling evil. And I'm sure that he would not see things in quite the same way. In fact, he would have likely thought of them as sacred acts from which he derived no pleasure whatsoever, but also no guilt from his actions. Whereas Farnese took a healthy dose of both from her time with the Holy Iron Chain Knights, a lot of repressed pleasure and an astonishing amount of guilt, showing that deep down she did possess a more empathetic nature, which from any initial meeting of the character, I would have thought to be practically impossible. I also find it really interesting to think about the fact that when we first met Farnese, it seemed like she was a beacon of confidence. She may not have been experienced enough to be in the position she was in, but she had this innate belief, which was gradually broken down to the point where the Farnese we see today questions absolutely everything, especially about herself. And in this way, she has become a student of the world rather than the leader of a doctrine, which is another thing that greatly appeals to me. I really love how Miura Miura handles the topic of religion in general in Berserk, and Farnese provides an integral part of that exploration. But with that said, there is still an underlying fundamental darkness at play with Farnese, one that was made most apparent when she was briefly possessed by a spirit, which saw her attempt to seduce Guts, and even suggests that he split her clean in half, in the most arousing way possible, of course. But the thing about this event is that this was not a clear-cut case of possession. This being was far more Farnese than I think Farnese would ever like to admit. It just exploited her raw desire for what I suppose we'll call some fairly extreme S&M. And look, as much as we here at the New World Review do not kink shame, that's a pretty dark place to go. And Farnese's life is a constant struggle of experiences between these features, each competing against one another, and her attempt to reconcile and discover who she actually is. Which I know every time that self-discovery as a concept is mentioned, it sounds like a reviewer is having a wank mid-video, but there really is no other way to describe it. And this is also before we start to examine her noble lineage and the idea that she was brought up to be a figurehead rather than an actual human being. As a member of the esteemed Van Diemen house, Farnese was constantly instructed on exactly how to live her life, with any deviation from that being completely unacceptable. And so, as a result of that, what we initially meet in the series is a woman who has absolutely no sense of self. She knows what she is supposed to be, and she feels supreme shame in response to anything that breaks through that barrier, revealing her true feelings about any number of topics. And so in many ways, Farnese is still something of a newborn in this world, because after having her connection to faith and societal expectations broken, she has only just now begun to explore herself. And I think that's very evident in group interactions, because Farnese is almost always, without fail, the most uncertain member of Guts' traveling party. Even when it comes to the child members, I mean, Shiake probably isn't a great example because she's a magical boss, but Isidro, for example, for better or worse, makes decisions very quickly, and when times get desperate, he does tend to know exactly how to act. Whereas Farnese takes more time to process events, which can generally be seen as a negative factor in life-threatening situations, but that's just her. Farnese is not perfect. She is heavily inexperienced and almost never knows what the right course of action is. And I think that's why I quite strongly connect with Farnese more so than most characters in Berserk, because in those kind of situations, that's definitely what I would be like, and I honestly feel like that's how most people would act. I am not quick thinking, and more often than not, I will probably choose, the second best option in a situation that requires swift decision making. So it is nice in a way to be part of Farnese's personal struggle in this world, which isn't just about decision making, but also obviously coming to terms with quite literally everything about her. Heritage, desires, relationships, belief, and so on and so forth. It's actually very akin to the struggle of Guts and Casca, although Farnese's is much more of an emotional and inner struggle, and one that is forever developing right in front of our eyes. But that's not just confined to Farnese's character alone, because this also presents itself in her interactions with others. So for example, as you may or may not have picked up on by now, Farnese has something of an infatuation with Guts, which also takes place on a plane of duality, because originally she was quite disgusted by him, but then broke down and evolved a sense of admiration and attraction. And certainly not just physical attraction either, because Farnese looks up to Guts as the pinnacle of how to live in a world completely devoid of hope. You know, how to keep trudging along when everything has been taken from you, and how to solidify your place in the world regardless. But what makes this most interesting is Farnese's relationship with Casca rather than Guts. So despite being quite awkward and a bit of a work in progress when it comes to battles, Farnese did have at least one undeniable talent right off the bat, which was to form a rapport with Casca and to be able to calm her, which obviously led her to developing a strong relationship with Casca, one that actually leads to great conflict within Farnese herself, because on the one hand she feels a legitimate sense of friendship with Casca, but at the same time there is an ever-present element of rivalry, because Casca is the object of Guts' unrelenting affections, which on paper sounds like an incredibly cringy love triangle, and usually I hate that sort of stuff in any series, but Miura does it pretty damn perfectly in Berserk. I personally feel genuinely torn along with Farnese, because I can see that beautiful bond with Casca, but it's also very easy to feel her immense frustration with Casca, or I guess not Casca herself, but the situation, because Guts continuously does everything within his power to keep her safe, and she just is not capable of responding to that desire in kind, or even adhering to basic safety protocols, more often than not making situations much worse and resulting in direct physical pain and injury inflicted upon Guts. And you know, come to think of it, the whole Guts-Farnese dynamic is actually kind of similar to that of Griffith and Casca, one individual admiring another from afar, doing everything she can to help her infatuation, but never having those feelings returned. Although hopefully this parallel ends just a little bit better for Farnese though. But we should also not ignore the fact that while complex, the idea that Farnese has been capable of forming these relationships at all is incredible evolution from what she was, which was this abstract figure of the world, an outcast in the guise of a noble figurehead. So even coming to grips with something as simple as realizing that she does in fact care for other people, be it Guts, Cast, Berserk, or whoever, is a pretty big step. But we don't even stop there, because Farnese continues to develop, which can be seen in her use of magic. And quite honestly, in real world time, she's only been studying the art for what, a couple of months now? And Farnese can already perform feats that impress characters who have been involved in this world their entire lives. So Farnese continues to solidify and sculpt her place in this world on every level imaginable, which is why I am always most interested to see her compared to the rest of the group. In certain situations, Farnese may appear to be a hindrance or even just plain useless, but this is certainly a character to keep an eye on. And that can be hard though, because she is overshadowed by everyone else in the traveling band, I suspect. Guts for obvious reasons, he's the main protagonist and gets all the glorious action. Casca because she's the primary love interest, and her recovery is not only the ultimate goal of Guts, but really the readers of Berserk as well. And then when it comes to Farnese's emerging strength in magic, she will always be overshadowed by the existence of the absurdly powerful Shirke. And with such prominent characters in mind, Farnese can become a bit of an afterthought, which I think is a grand shame, because I really cannot name another character in this series who has delivered such consistent substance, evolution, and who superbly questions how I directly feel about them. On the spectrum of Berserk, Farnese is what I would consider to be the direct center, a character who has explored the light and the dark of existence, but one that doesn't necessarily belong in either camp. And quite frankly, I am captivated. I think that Berserk would lose an incredible amount of substance without Farnese, and I look forward to continuing to struggle alongside her on this epic journey. But what do you guys think? Please do let me know down in the comments below, or even join my Discord server. And if you're keen for some more Berserk content, then please do go and check out some of my other videos, or even subscribe to the channel for hopefully regular Berserk content uploaded straight into your YouTube feed. But for now, this has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.